Tribal communities risk losing local libraries and the history they hold amid Doge cuts. Naranjo said the library relies on federal grant money to build bridges between the tribe and otherwise out-of-reach services. So again, more cuts to people who can't afford to bear the weights of those cuts in service of essentially handing money over to people who have more of it than they could ever possibly spend.
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup.
This is Ashley with Status Coup.
On the ground.
In Philadelphia.
Flint, Michigan. East Palestine, Ohio. Please support the leading independent news outlet on the ground.
Covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, this is Ashley Bishop with Status Coup. Lost within all of the Doge cuts and Trump's one big beautiful disaster of a bill for everyone who is not a billionaire, you might have missed that these cuts from the Trump administration have also included significant cuts to tribal communities and services that the federal government is legally mandated to provide. So we wanted to highlight some of what's going on here that, again, has slipped through the cracks. So what are some of these basic services that the federal government is legally mandated to provide for tribal communities? Things like healthcare, schools and education, tribal police forces, environmental protections that include things like ensuring access to clean water, programs like the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, FDPIR, housing assistance, and child welfare programs. Again, these are just some of the services that the federal government provides for tribal communities. And as what I'm about to read to you says, this is not an act of generosity on the part of the federal government. So this story is from Stateline from the beginning of last month that I'm going to share with you guys. The federal government's unique role in supporting tribal services is not an act of generosity. It is a legal mandate based on treaty rights guaranteed to tribal nations in exchange for conceding land. Tribes across the country signed nearly 400 treaties in the 18th and 19th centuries, and modern legal efforts have reaffirmed the Fed's obligation to uphold those promises. In addition to the specific rights outlined in those treaties, the federal government also must uphold its trust responsibility to tribes, a legal obligation under which the United States must protect tribal sovereignty and provide basic social services for tribal nations. Again, those basic social services are things like healthcare, school, education, police forces, environmental protections, housing assistance, and programs that protect child welfare. Many legal experts say the Trump administration's efforts to gut federal agencies and cut off funds to Native communities likely violate the government's obligations. Tribal leaders have called on Trump to reverse the cuts and earned at least one reprieve last month, so that would have been March, when the Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. verbally rescinded layoffs at the Indian Health Service. There's certainly a lot of trepidation in Indian country because so many tribal programs rely on federal funding, said Guffey Lord, managing attorney of the Tribal Partnerships Program with Earth Justice, an environmental law group. These are absolutely legal obligations based on the federal trust responsibility. Some tribal observers also fear that Trump's administration could roll back regulations that allow tribes to protect their water quality. That's imperative for tribal members whose diet features high amounts of traditional foods such as salmon and wild rice. Meanwhile, Trump has pledged to block funding for DEI programs, efforts to boost diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tribes told Stateline they had been warned by federal agency insiders that many of their grants could be at risk. Native leaders are pushing Trump officials to acknowledge that the Fed's relationship with tribe is based on their status as sovereign nations, not racial preference. Tribes are still working to understand how their communities will be affected, and many tribal nations and organizations did not respond to interview requests. Some observers have noted that Trump's penchant for targeting his political enemies may make some officials wary of putting their tribe in the crosshairs by speaking out publicly. I would say that is a very legitimate concern, and he has already taken hits in the past at tribal communities, but we will come back to that. I have a very enlightening video to share of our President Donald Trump making some unsurprisingly racist allegations against tribal communities in a bid to protect his growing casino business in 1993. But again, we will come back to that. I want to move on to some more cuts to critical services. So this is from Tribal Business News on May 2nd. So Trump budget proposes deep cuts to Native American programs. The Trump budget cuts funding for core tribal programs by nearly one quarter, including a $617 million cut to the Bureau of Indian Affairs program that support tribal self-governance and communities. The proposal includes eliminating the Indian Guaranteed Loan Program for tribal business development, which the White House calls duplicative of several other programs that tribal businesses can access. Tribal law enforcement funding would see a $107 million reduction, a 20% cut, to streamline the tribal law enforcement program to reduce redundancies and inefficiencies. According to the budget document, the Bureau of Indian Education Construction Program faces a $187 million cut, with the administration citing poor management, cost overruns, and delays in school construction and repairs. This would eliminate funding for construction of tribal schools, many of which are already in poor condition. Overall, the Trump budget proposes slashes nearly $911 million, or 24%, from core tribal programs that fulfill the federal government's trust and treaty responsibilities to tribal nations, including road maintenance, housing, and programs for children and families. Trump's plan would eliminate the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant entirely. Dave Castillo, CEO of Native Community Capital, goes on to say it's almost as though the White House doesn't know what it's doing. I hate to say that I think the White House, in fact, does know what it's doing. These cuts are in line with all of the other financial attacks that they have made on other vulnerable communities and on working people. So let's move on to attacks on healthcare. So this is a piece from Native News Online. IHS has long been underfunded and understaffed, with a historic vacancy rate of nearly 30% and a budget that falls tens of billions short of its projected need. Native Americans experience the most negative health outcomes across the board, with some of the highest rates of cancer, heart disease, respiratory illness, diabetes, overdose, and suicide. In 2022, the life expectancy for Native Americans was 67.8 years, the lowest of any racial group in the United States, and nearly 10 years below the national average of 77.4 years. On January 20th, Trump issued an executive order aimed at putting a stop to radical and wasteful DEI programs and preferencing. Another, issued on February 11th, granted authority to DOJ to reduce the size of the federal government's workforce through efficiency improvements and attrition. The orders created chaos as thousands of federal grants froze, employees were terminated, and initiatives operating under DEI shuttered, while the United States' legal obligation to provide health care to tribal nations falls outside of DEI. Native health care was swept up in the flirt. On February 14th, news broke that an estimated 2,500 probationary IHS Indian Health Services employees were on the chopping block as a result of the orders. A.C. Lockyer, executive director of the National Indian Health Board, told Native News Online that the staffing cuts would have a devastating effect on Native communities. When we were experiencing government shutdowns, clinics closed, significantly downsizing services, limiting or eliminating critical access to care has led many times to mortality in our communities, he said in February. Native health organizations and nonprofits basically sent a letter reminding the federal government of their legal mandates, their responsibilities, and the following week, the cuts to IHS were rescinded after saying that IHS has always been treated as the redheaded stepchild at HHS, but a month later, the administration announced it would be canceling the leases of 12 IHS offices across the country in a move to reduce federal office space. The past 3 months have also seen the gutting of federal programs outside of IHS that support tribal health. At the CDC, a group of programs geared towards reducing overdoses in Native communities was drastically reduced from 7 employees to 1. I don't know how you have an agency that is functioning with just 1 employee. And beyond that, the next 100 days appear poised to sow more cuts and confusion. A 64-page Office of Management and Budget passback document from April 10th detailed proposed plans to cut $900 million more from IHS. This loss of funding will lead to deaths in our communities from preventable medical incidents such as precipitous births, cardiac events, untreated diabetes complications, and preventable suicides. We know these impacts because we have lived these outcomes before IHS had advanced appropriations. During previous government shutdowns, members of our families died from these exact types of preventable emergencies. And that was from an April 17th letter to RFK addressing the proposed cuts from NIHB, National Indian Health Board Chairman William Chief Bill Smith. And here again, we are shown just how much disdain this administration has for anyone in this country who is not a member of the billionaire class. And it's not just things like healthcare. Cuts are also being made to libraries, which serve an extremely important role in rural communities as well as tribal communities, as access to the internet can be non-existent or unreliable. People may need to go to the library just to do things that we use the internet every day to do, like apply for jobs or pay bills or attend classes, or again, any number of things that you do on a daily basis without thinking about it. And the administration is going to make all of that all the more difficult for already disadvantaged communities. So here is one from NBC. Tribal communities risk losing local libraries and the history they hold amid Doge cuts. Internet service across the Santa Clara Pueblo Reservation is sparse, the tribe's governor, James Naranjo, told NBC News, and resources to expand access to technology and literacy programs for its 1,700 members are already stretched thin. Naranjo said the library relies on federal grant money to build bridges between the tribe and otherwise out-of-reach services, grants that could be on the chopping block thanks to cuts by the Trump administration. The Pueblos was one of the more than 100 libraries on federally recognized tribal lands across the country that were notified by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, a small federal agency responsible for funding local libraries and museums across the country, that their congressionally appropriated grant had been terminated mid-cycle, according to an IMLS spokesperson. The agency has determined that your grant is unfortunately no longer consistent with the agency's priorities and no longer serves the interests of the United States and the IMLS program. One letter obtained by NBC News from a tribal grant writer who received it said, IMLS is repurposing its funding allocations in a new direction in furtherance of the president's agenda. This letter was signed by Deputy Labor Secretary Keith Sonderling, whom President Donald Trump appointed as acting director of the IMLS in March. Days before Sonderling's appointment, Trump signed an executive order directing the agency and 6 others to be eliminated to the maximum extent consistent with applicable law. Only Congress holds the legal authority to shut down the agency. So funding libraries in vulnerable communities, when it's more than just about funding libraries, it's about access to the internet and other services, is no longer in the interest of the United States. That is good to know. The article goes on. Trump's March 14th order instructed IMLS, which guarantees states and sovereign tribes can provide the public with free access to myriad services like early literacy resources, braille books, internet access, and STEM and cultural programs, to cease all operations, slash staff, and provide a report to the Office of Management and Budget detailing proof of compliance. Within days, Doge descended upon the 75-person IMLS staff. All but a dozen were placed on administrative leave. Then in early April, Sonderling terminated all IMLS grants except for those missed by human error. The American Library Association and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the largest union representing library employees, sued Sonderling, Trump, and Doge to stop the dismantling of the IMLS last month. So again, more cuts to people who can't afford to bear the weights of those cuts in service of essentially handing money over to people who have more of it than they could ever possibly spend. And as promised, let's close with a bit of historical insight into where some of this clear animosity from the Trump administration could be coming from. This is from a Washington Post piece from 2016. Donald Trump's long history of clashes with Native Americans. So Donald Trump claimed that Indian reservations had fallen under mob control. He secretly paid for more than $1 million in ads that portrayed members of a tribe in upstate New York as cocaine traffickers and career criminals. And he suggested in testimony and in media appearances that dark-skinned Native Americans in Connecticut were faking their ancestry. I think I might have more Indian blood than a lot of the so-called Indians that are trying to open up the reservations, Trump said during a 1993 radio interview with shock jock Don Imus. Insane, totally insane. Trump's harsh rhetoric on Native Americans was part of his aggressive war on the expanding Native American casino industry during the 1990s, which posed a threat to his gambling empire. So we have some video of this, so we will watch some of this.
If this continues as a threat, it's my opinion that it will blow. It will blow sky high. It will be the biggest scandal ever, or one of the biggest scandals since Al Capone in terms of organized crime. I believe that There's going to be a lot of embarrassed and a lot of red faces. But to sit here and listen, as people are saying that there's no organized crime, that there's no money laundering, that there's no anything, and that an Indian chief is going to tell Joey Killer to please get off his reservation is almost unbelievable to me.
You have basically stated that the problem seems to be that the FBI doesn't have any people, or is that correct? Is the issue that you...
No, I think it's far beyond that. I think that people have got paper bags over their faces and nobody's looking. Everybody, it seems to me, from even just a common sense standpoint, knows what's going on.
Did you submit this list to the FBI at any time?
I'm not a law enforcement officer. I'm not supposed to be going around checking Indian reservations. That's what you have the FBI for, and they're very capable, the most capable. But that's not my job. The Indians don't have to pay tax. Nobody's more for the Indians than Donald Trump.
So in typical Trump fashion, it's, this thing is happening. I'm going to provide no evidence. Just take me at my word that this thing that I couldn't possibly have any expertise in is actually happening.
And you ask about competing. I love to compete. Nobody likes, and I think many of you folks up there know for a fact that I love to compete. But I like to compete on an equal footing. I'm competing and paying hundreds of millions of dollars in tax. My so-called, as you would call them, opponent, and they're not an opponent, but my opponent is competing and paying no tax. It's not a fair situation.
You indicate that they don't pay taxes.
I didn't.
So this is what this is about. The fact that he has to pay taxes and he feels like it is hurting his business interests to have to pay taxes, which it seems like that is what it always boils down to. They don't want to be paying taxes.
Indicate they don't pay taxes. I said they're not paying taxes on casino.
No, that's because the profits from it are to go to the reservations.
Oh, really?
In spite of the FBI testimony that this is not a significant problem, Mr. Trump, in one sentence you say they are the most capable of agencies and that you're not a law enforcement expert, and then you tell us that you have superior knowledge to their knowledge about the extent of organized crime on Indian reservations.
You've got a totally closed mind on the subject, sir. We could walk in here with the greatest proof in the history of the world, and frankly, your mind is so closed for whatever reason that I can't believe it.
But you don't have that.
If you really want to study this,
yes.
When you tell me that there are no FBI agents assigned to the Indian reservations, and yet you have tremendous numbers in Las Vegas and in Atlantic City, tremendous numbers. In fact, two of their largest places. I want to tell you something. You have a long way to go. And for whatever reason, you have a closed mind. I don't know why. Perhaps you could tell me.
No, Mr. Trump, I have a closed mind against evidence that is not substantiated.
Oh, well.
I have a closed mind against statements that are made about other people in generality.
You're going to be very embarrassed in 2 years, sir.
You go on a radio show and you say, now some drunken Indians want to come down here and open a reservation.
I didn't say that, sir. Quote it. I didn't say that. Who said that? Who said that? I'd like an apology right now because I didn't say that.
Imus opened the broadcast, so, excuse me, Mr. Imus said that.
Okay. Could I please have an apology?
You can have an apology.
Thank you, sir.
And then you went on to, is this you discussing Indian blood? We're going to judge people by whether they have Indian blood, whether they're qualified to run a gaming casino or not?
That probably is me, absolutely. Because I'll tell you what, if you look at some of the reservations that you've approved, you, sir, in your great wisdom have approved, I will tell you right now, they don't look like Indians to me. And they don't look like to Indians. Now, maybe we say politically correct or not politically correct. They don't look like Indians to me, and they don't look like Indians to Indians. And a lot of people are laughing at it, and you're telling how tough it is, how rough it is to get approved. Well, you go up to Connecticut, and you look. Now, they don't look like Indians to me, sir.
Thank God that's not the test of whether or not people have rights in this.
I mean, this is all insane, and there's too much to even respond to as the crazy flows out of his mouth.
Country or not, whether or not they pass your look test.
Depends whether or not you're approving it, sir.
No, it's not a question whether I'm approving it. It's not a question whether I'm approving it. Mr. Trump, you know in the history of this country where we've heard this discussion before, they don't look Jewish to me.
Oh, really?
They don't look Indian to me. They don't look Italian to me. Mm-hmm.
Well,
They don't look Italian to me. They don't look Indian to me. They don't look Jewish to me. They don't look Jewish to me. They don't look Italian to me. They don't look Indian to me. They don't look Italian to me. They don't look Jewish to me. They don't look Italian 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 to me. They don't And that was a test for whether people could go into business or not go into business, whether they could get a bank loan. You're too black, you're not black enough.
I want to find out.
That's not
Well, then why you're
That's not-
approving for Indian? Why don't you approve it for everybody then, sir?
That's not a-
If your case is non-discriminatory, why don't you approve for everybody? You're saying only Indians. Wait a minute, sir.
Stand for it and
You're
fight
saying only Indians can have the reservations, only Indians can have the gaming. So why aren't you approving it for everybody? Why are you being discriminatory? Why is it that the Indians don't pay tax, but everybody else does? I do.
Only Indians can have the reservations, is what he just said.
Why is it that I pay tax? Why is it that senior citizens get tremendous benefit from the taxes that a certain industry does, but the Indians aren't contributing to that? Why aren't the Indians, excuse me, sir, why aren't the Indians that are making all the money in Connecticut, which is the most successful of the Indian reservations, why aren't they spreading the wealth with the other Indians, sir? Why don't you do something for the other Indians that are living in total poverty? Because you know why? Because their
Mr.
reservation
Trump,
is
if you'll
too
give
far
the
away.
chairman a chance to answer your questions, I'm sure he will.
I'm sure he will, absolutely.
That is all absolutely insane. And the crux of what he's saying there is everything has been unfair to me, Donald Trump. And you know, the Native Americans are profiting too much. That's what he's saying. It should be no wonder the why behind all of these cuts that are going on right now. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for suffering through that video with me. That was awful. Please like, subscribe, and follow Status Coup News, and please become a paid member at statuscoup.com/join, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.